Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. Thanks for the snow. It was 80 degrees on Saturday when I left Southern California for my book tour, and I forgot a jacket. I don't even have a jacket. I just have this. Oh, well, you make adjustments, I guess. The Human Progress website is really quite good. I wish that would have come out when I was doing my research, because there's a lot of great resources there. And actually, there's quite a few of us talking about moral progress. It's not really popular. As Pinker described here, there's reasons why pessimism sells better than optimism. But so for me, it's sort of a natural extension of what I do for my day job. We're a pro-science magazine. Science and Reason is our thing. And I've written books and talked quite a lot about science and pseudoscience, science and religion, science and morality. To what extent can science have anything to say about morality? And the standard line is that nothing. It has nothing to say about right and wrong and human values. That's a whole separate thing, either religion or philosophy, and so I disagree with that. And that's one of the theses of my book, is that science and reason have been the primary drivers of moral progress, and not religion as much. My title comes from, of course, the inspirational speech, probably the second greatest speech Martin Luther King Jr. gave at the climax of his march from Selma to Montgomery, which is beautifully portrayed in the film that's up for an Oscar now. I didn't know that making that a film. I just thought it was a great story of what it took to get there. And the speech was given not on the steps of the Capitol. Pretty much every story you'll ever read about the Selma March, that King gave this famous speech from the steps, Capitol steps at Montgomery, and he didn't. Wallace wouldn't let him on the government property there, and so they had to do it on the back of a flatbed truck parked in front on the street. Anyway, that was sort of interesting. And so he was echoing a 19th century abolitionist preacher named Theodore Parker, who said that about the moral universe, my eye reaches but little ways, and I can't tell for sure, but it looks to me like the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, and that's where King got that. And in fact, it worked. The march, the civil rights movement, the demanding of equal rights, resulting in the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that summer. About 4 or 5 months later, you can see Dr. King standing there looking over President Johnson's shoulders, signing that into law. In fact, of course, granting the franchise to all adults in a society is what we mean by a liberal democracy, where everybody gets to vote. So this particular data set, I'll have quite a few here today, shows that there were none in 1800. In fact, it wasn't really until after the First World War and then after the Second World War where there was a real burst in the spread of democracies. The Polity Project rates democracies on a 1 to 10 scale. Some democracies are better than others. Some are more transparent, some are more corrupt. Fortunately, in ours, money doesn't influence our democratic process. I think America slid from an 8 to a 7. In any case, so that's a sign of moral progress if you think that expanding the moral sphere to include more and more people as having equal rights, then that's a sign of progress. Part of it, of course, is the granting of the franchise to women and women's rights. And you can see the process here. Look at our little, I have the slide clicker thing. Do I need a, okay, here we go. Sorry about that. No, just gonna, here, try that. That's okay, I'll just use my hands. Anyway, you can see the United States, we didn't pass it until 1920, but we're still quite a ways ahead of everybody else. What I found that was interesting is these little areas in the 1800s where women were granted the right to vote. Pitcairn Island, of course, there's like 12 people there, so easy to get a majority. The Isle of Man, Cook Islands, New Zealand. And now pretty much every country in the world has it, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, perhaps this year in 2015. And I like the Vatican City said, never. How do rights come about? Well, they start from the bottom up. It's a process of the people that don't have the rights demanding that they have them. They march, they protest, they say this is not right, and we're not going to put up with this anymore. And I came across this amazing photograph of one of the early rights revolution leaders, Inez Milholland, in her march on Washington, D.C. Here in 1913, she led this march on this white stallion. I just found this magnificent. I would follow her anywhere on that white stallion. And it would be hard to really object to that and stand in front of that. Horses are big. And since then, so I have a chapter on civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, animal rights, so on. So I'll be talking about those in turn. But you can really see the turning point here in the mid-1990s when the percentage of 25 to 32-year-old women with at least a 4-year college degree went from, in 1970, an 8% gap to essentially reversing it to a 7% gap ahead of men and crossing that line in the early 1990s. And having a college degree, of course, correlates with economic prosperity, so the closing of the gap, again, from 25 to 34-year-olds is sort of in the peak of when you really start generating your income, from 67% difference in 1980 to a 93% difference in 2012. You'll often see a much smaller number, but like a 73% or 77% figure, but that's because they're counting all age groups. And so what the rights revolutions often happen is there's a gap demographically across time, but this is the most important one, I think, that shows progress. And now we're in the middle of another rights revolution. And the amazing thing about this rights revolution is that we can see it unfolding before our eyes and keep track of who's against it and who's for it and how the change comes about. Of course, it began in 1979 in Stonewall in New York with the protests but you can see the changing attitudes from the early 1970s when most people believed that gays should not have equal opportunity, gay marriage should not be legal, to it crossing over in the mid-2000s to over 50% for most people in Gallup polls and general social survey polls. Even the president said and changed his mind. In 2008, he said, "I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. I am not in favor of gay marriage." And he's a liberal saying this. And now in 2012, he says, "I've just concluded that for me personally, it's important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married." And you can see where it crossed, pretty close to where just around the time he changed his mind. That's, of course, what politicians do. But in fact, that's what everybody does. People just, they get swept along with the tide of the changing rights revolution. And those who are opposed to it, they just quit talking about it. Rarely does anybody come out and publicly say, "I changed my mind." You have to if you're the president, I guess. But most people just change their mind quietly and don't say anything more about it. In more secular European countries like Germany, gay marriage and same-sex marriage and gay rights is really, truly non-controversial. These are friends of my wife, who's German. Heiko and Jürgen got married, and there's lots of same-sex marriages there. It's really no big deal. No one ever talks about it. It's just a non-event. And they look at us like we're just barbaric for even having this conversation. And so you can see how it comes about in terms of age. The millennials are the most in favor of it, people born after 1981. Generation X is lagging just a little behind, people born after 1965. Us baby boomers are just really slowly being pulled up with our fingernails dug into the past. And hanging on for dear life for the old school is the silent generation, not likely to give it up, but they'll all be gone soon enough anyway. That's an old observation, actually, called the Planck problem, that Max Planck observed that in science, revolutions only change when the old guard dies out and the new guard comes up, the new Turks come up with that. And so who opposes this? Of course, primarily religious fundamentalists and literalists, white evangelicals, black Protestants, white mainline Protestants, and Catholics have been largely against it. And the revolution has been led primarily by the religiously unaffiliated. And to give credit where credit is due, the Episcopalians and secular Jews were in favor of gay marriage long ago. And by the way, I have some good news for you libertarians that are also in favor of the legalization of pot and gay marriage. I found biblical support for both. In Leviticus chapter 20, it says that if a man lies with another man, he must be stoned.